the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. Learn about the most current IT security threats in ransomware, phishing, business email compromise, cybercrime tactics, cyber heist schemes, social engineering scams, as well as hints and tips from leading professionals to help you prevent hackers from penetrating your network and dropping ransomware or malware payloads. This podcast will arm you with the best info to defend your network against the latest cyber crimes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And now, here's your host, Craig Petronella.
You're listening to Cybersecurity and Compliance with Craig Petronella. Visit us online at petronellaTech.com.
Hey, Sam. How are you today?
Hey, Craig. I'm doing well. Yourself?
Good. Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
How's your day going?
What's that?
How's your day going?
Good. It's pretty busy. This DFARS interim rule is it's pretty busy and causing a lot of people to need help.
Your world is ever changing.
That's exactly
like mine
right.
changes once a year. Yours is changing like once a week.
Yeah. It was a webinar last week from Katie Arrington around the DoD DFARS interim rule and how it affects over 300,000 federal contractors. And there's a lot of questions around that. Some folks were thinking that they were not needing to upload their self-assessment to the SPRS database by November 30th. And she said pretty much everyone needs to upload it unless you're what's called COTS or off-the-shelf, commercial off-the-shelf products. But yeah, so there's a lot of questions around it. And I think that even if folks don't fall into the controlled unclassified information bucket, I think they should still do the self-assessment process. It's freely available to everyone, and it's only going to help everyone. I mean, it's only going to help improve the cybersecurity of their company. So even if they, fiddle through it, but if they get stuck, just reach out to a cybersecurity specialist and get help. It's only going to help strengthen their organization and increase their cyber maturity level. And, I think it's a good thing all around.
Yeah, I wish I could say everyone was self-motivated in this realm, but it's usually the threat of either severe cuts to revenue or even fines. When I say cuts to revenue, I really mean, a suspension in operations or the threat of it. That's really what motivates folks, other than applying or complying with, federal guidelines for HIPAA or anything else. So you hate to sell by fear but I guess people just have to see more of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When I went through the CMMC training, they talked about the False Claims Act, and they talked about why the CMMC came about, and they talked about the self-attestment and self-assessment process just not working well for folks, and that's where I saw that it just really affects a lot of different industries, or it will, because it, for example, with PCI or payment card industry compliance, for folks that take credit cards. I mean, almost every small business takes a credit card. So they're supposed to do the self-attestation of PCI compliance. So they typically go to, if they're using Square or some vendor to authorize.net to take credit cards, they're supposed to do that self-attestment process. And they're supposed to do that once a year. And it's usually like 50 or 60 questions. But a lot of people just click and click next and submit, and they don't realize, they don't realize what they're clicking on. It's kind of like going to a new website and accepting the terms of use. And it's like, look, if you don't accept the terms of use, you need to leave, right? But most people are like, no, I want to buy whatever, or I want to see whatever they got. So they just say yes, and they just move on.
Right. Or an insurance application.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I guess my point is I think the CMMC is a good thing. I think that it's the third party involvement, the third party looking over your shoulder and making sure that you're doing all the stuff the right way, and you have two forms of supporting evidence for each of the 110 plus controls, and coming on site to your office and making sure this is done, I think that's a game changer. I think that that's going to greatly affect your industry. And by all means, introduce yourself, Sam. I mean, welcome. I appreciate you coming on board. Happy to have you help answer any kind of cybersecurity insurance questions for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my name is Sam Brown. I'm the Vice President of the Human Services Group here at Rancho Mesa Insurance Services. We're a commercial property casualty and health benefits agency focusing on certainly cyber liability, as well as workers' compensation, directors and officers liability, general liability, property, and auto as well. We have two main verticals, which would be the health and human services, that's nonprofits, healthcare, education, and then construction. That being said, many of the insurance lines that we sell are going to apply to many, many different industries across many different states, such as workers' comp or directors and officers liability and cyber liability, which is why we're talking today. So happy to talk about what I know, or at least what I have learned since March, in how employers need to be ever more diligent in communicating and training to their employees who are now virtual, what they ought to be doing. So
thank you.
Yeah, we're on the risk management side.
Thanks. I appreciate you coming on. So talk about a little bit, if you don't mind, about what a small business should be looking for in a cybersecurity policy. What are some of the gotchas? I know you'd mentioned before about cybercrime coverage, and
right.
Maybe you could just kind of talk a little bit about that for a minute.
Yeah. So cyber liability insurance, it goes by a couple different names. It might be data compromise insurance as well. It does a number of different things. They've become very broad in the various triggers for coverage. So obviously, if your information or if your system as an employer, as a company, has been breached, and very sensitive information, whether it's health information, social security numbers, just any information has been out there, it could be that you're subject to a lawsuit and another company were to sue you. You would have coverage for the defense costs, so the attorneys who are going to defend you against those allegations, and then any settlement or judgment that does come to pass, you'd have coverage for that as well. But aside from that, you really have a lot of different coverage which are going to come into play. So you could have coverage for administrative penalties, such as HIPAA fines. If your system were to get hacked and you have ransomware, where it says, hey, Craig, my name is Sergey, and I have locked your system up, and you need to pay me 10,000 Bitcoin. And if you do, I'll free up your system. If you don't, best of luck. The insurance carrier is going to do their best to send in a forensics team after carefully monitoring how much that would cost the insurance company, of course, and try to free you up. And if that doesn't work, or if they feel like it's cheaper to send in the ransom to free you up, they'll do that as well. But then hopefully that forensics team will be able to quickly patch up those holes, right? So it doesn't happen again. There's also going to be the cost to notify everybody whose information may have been compromised. So you may remember a couple of years ago, Target and a lot of other large retailers may have been hacked. And they have to, by law, as we all do, send notification via U.S. Postal to everybody and say, hey, if you shopped here between the months of December and January, your information may have been compromised, and we've enrolled you in free credit monitoring. So it's going to respond to that as well. And then cyber policies are also going to have, as you mentioned, the cyber crime component. So that cyber typically means stolen data, but the cyber crime is going to reference stolen money and securities. So that's going to be computer fraud and funds transfer fraud are the two big ones in that category.
Like business email compromise, where if your tricked with a phishing email into wiring funds or sending gift cards to.
Well, that's the next one. That's commonly referred to as social engineering or voluntary parting. So let's say that I'm the president of a company and I'm going to Minnesota on business for a conference. Well, the bad guys, as you know, Craig, the bad guys will sit on my email if they've breached us, and they'll know exactly what's happening. They know my travel plans. They know they're watching my email going back and forth with everybody at the company. Yep. Well, at the right time, they're going to email somebody with control of funds at my company and say, "Hey, this is Sam. I'm in Minneapolis. I just got in a terrible accident. I don't have my health insurance coverage. I need you to wire me $25,000." And this works. Fortunately, a lot of time it doesn't. But if it were to work, that is also coverage that can be found on a cyber liability insurance policy. So a number of different triggers for coverage, but that's a pretty good overview.
And just a few weeks ago, I remember watching on LinkedIn a post from an attorney saying that they passed a law or something around no longer being able to pay the cyber criminals in the example that you gave, like with Bitcoin. So say they lock you up with ransomware, they trick your employee or yourself into clicking on a fictitious link or a spoofed link that looked like it came from a trusted source. They lock your systems up, they encrypt it, 2048-bit encryption or so, and then they demand in 24 or 48 hours 3 Bitcoin payments to somewhere. I was watching a thread from a data privacy attorney, and he was saying that if the criminals are on, I forget the list, but it's basically like the blacklist for our country, if they're in maybe a sanctioned area of Russia or China, for example, if they're on that list or a terrorist list, and you're found to send them the ransom payment, the 3 Bitcoin, you can get prosecuted for money laundering. Have you heard about that?
I haven't heard about the money laundering, but I have heard that they're watching this closely because they're really trying to stop all
payments,
all sources of support of any sort of illegal activity, right?
Yep.
So insurance companies have deep pockets. That's why people get sued. So yeah, if insurance companies are in the habit of making these ransom payments, one quick way to end that would be to put in some legislation that would disallow it. It would, might create a little bit of a headache for employers or for the policyholders. But as long as there's an understanding that there isn't coverage, when you're purchasing the policy, then you just, you're in the habit of implementing best practices, right? So ever the more reason to help employees get trained up. As you can test the employee workforce to say, hey, we're gonna randomly test a few employees and just see if they click on the link that they're not supposed to.
That's right.
All those measures are just going to be so much more important.
Absolutely. And those drills are important too. So it's not only important to have the policies and procedures and the security controls, but actually do the drills and test your employees each month and make sure that they're not clicking on things they shouldn't be. And then if they are, send them back to boot camp and get them trained up, because, if you've got employees that are not trained and they're clicking on stuff that they shouldn't be, that's going to lock you up and get you in a real bad spot real fast with these ransomware. I mean, I saw another headline. I wrote a blog post about it on how ransomware is targeting hospitals at the moment. And there's a huge uptick from the FBI. There was an announcement. But it all boils down to the same stuff I've been preaching for years, but nobody wants to listen to the proactive stuff. They don't want to, they don't want to do anything until it happens to them, right? Or until it affects them. So that was very interesting what I was reading about the money laundering thing. And it was also ironic to read that a lot of the counties and the state level areas that were hacked with ransomware, that I know they tried hard to not pay, but some of them did pay. Some of them had to, because they had no backup systems to restore from. Right. And that's, the hackers, they do recon to figure that out and see how bad a shape you would be if you lost all your backups, and then if they got your backups and they got your systems, they know they got you, and they know that there's a high chance for them to get paid. Right. And, this is a business to them and it works.
It works and it's repeatable, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know all the black hat cyber criminals out there, what they're capable of, but I got to think that they're not just working on one big hospital at a time, right?
No, they're sending out squads and they're scripting. I mean, I've always said this, they're smart and they're lazy. So they write scripts. They write scripts. They don't do all the heavy lifting themselves. I just read a thing this morning. They're buying ads on Facebook now to attract you, and they get the ad approved, and then they switch the link to an infected web server with ransomware. So they're casting their nets wider and wider to trick people, not just with email phishing scams and social engineering, as you mentioned, but now they're going steps farther. They're going on social media. They're going where you hang out, and they're looking to trick you there too. So it's, I've even had I don't know if I told you this, but I've had a law firm tell me that they would not want to do all the stuff that I recommended based on NIST and all the preparedness that they're supposed to be doing, and that they would just buy a cybersecurity insurance and just do a payout. Well,
so that is called a moral hazard, where it's like, well, I'll park my car underneath that volcano. I have insurance.
Right.
But I think I learned that when I went through my licensing, a moral hazard. So yeah,
I've had folks tell me that. I've also had folks where I went to their premise and had a meeting with them, and I said, okay, well, let's look at your server room, and they show me their server room, and it's in the men's room.
Yeah,
and it's right next to the water, the sprinkler systems on the roof, and I'm like, if you guys don't hire my company or just go get a professional to move this stuff out of here, this is not a spot for electronics.
And I think that, to your point, all the preemptive measures you can take, all the best practices are becoming so important because, now with the pandemic having forced many of, America's workforce into a virtual mode, whatever controls were there, they need revamping, or they need to be explicitly communicated and trained in the form of a work from home policy. So, questions that I've been asking, or when looking at the cyber insurance renewal or policies we have in place, is okay, is coverage going to get triggered if something happens offsite? Right. So my chief admin officer is working from the living room, helping his kids with math, and he clicks on the wrong link. Is that going to qualify for coverage? Or if there's a breach into a personal machine, right? A personal piece of equipment. So it's my own laptop at home. It's not company issued. Maybe I'm missing some security patches. And again, maybe through no fault of my own, my computer gets hacked, or maybe I jump onto some public Wi-Fi at an eatery. Is coverage going to apply there? And then, of course, does it include social engineering? But yeah, the virtual component, the virtual aspect of the workforce is just making it more important to ask those questions prior to, as you're sifting through the quotes. And
you're absolutely right. And if you think about it, before COVID hit and people were in the corporate environment, they go to work, they're typically working off of a corporate controlled endpoint, laptop, desktop. The corporation has installed security control software, monitoring tools, backup systems, advanced firewalls, intrusion detection systems, all the IT infrastructure, right? If you're a small company, maybe you have pieces of those things. But the point here is if they did some type of self-assessment or attestation, they did it off of that model, that diagram, right? I'm in the building, I've got physical controls, maybe I have a key card, or all these different things.
Right.
But now COVID hit. So now everybody's working from home. Most businesses did not issue an endpoint that have their security controls on it. They're allowing people to work from home. So that's where your BYOD, or bring your own device policy, comes in, right?
Right.
And if you don't have one of those, then you don't have any clear direction for the employee to follow what's allowed and what's not. Right. So what happens is you've got a lot of folks that are working from home. Their home computer is not going to be very up to date often. No. Most of the time it's going to be out of date. It's going to be an older operating system. they're not religious about patching and checking patches and then patching, rebooting, patching again.
Right.
They may not be technical. Maybe they never even do that. But my point is that now you've got all these open doors, these unpatched endpoints, and a lot of employees working from home are working with sensitive data. And that could be PHI in healthcare or patient health information or some type of personal identifiable information. So, most of these people that are working from home, not only are their endpoints insecure, but they're usually working off of the internet service provider's modem,
Right.
which the password is like an 8-character, super easy to hack password. It's like sticky noted right on the firewall appliance.
Or it's the employee's home address.
Yeah, or something dumb like that, or their last 4 digits of their phone number, or something dumb like that. All it would take is a war driver or some malicious person within range of them sitting in their car. And this does happen, by the way. They sit in their car, they find an access point, they use some freely available open source tools, break into your network, sniff your traffic, look, see what's interesting, maybe steal something, break into your system, exfiltrate data from you. You might not even know, and oftentimes you won't know because you don't have technology to detect this stuff.
Yeah.
So
I read a stat that said that prior to the pandemic, the FBI would field about 1,000 reports a day of some sort of data breach. Since March, that's up to 3,000 to 4,000 a day. And I got to think it's higher than that now.
Oh, I'm sure it's higher than that.
So those are just the ones that we know about.
That's right.
To your point.
Yeah.
How many don't we know about?
Well,
and then also circling back to something you had said, I had read that 85% of employees that are working on their own device at home are circumventing their employer's policies and protocols. Downloading games, looking at YouTube, Facebook. That's a scary point you made. If I'm going on Facebook while I'm on my lunch break, but I click on a link that I think is leading me to an article about the election or what have you, and they got me.
Yeah, and it's so easy. I don't know if you know about keyloggers or keylogger malware. Keylogger malware goes on the black market for about $100. It's a piece of software that a malicious actor, bad actor, can trick you via social engineering, phishing, all the above, into you clicking on this email attachment. Maybe it's disguised as an invoice or some PDF attached, whatever. It doesn't matter. That they drop the payload on your system. Oftentimes, nothing happens to alert you that anything happened. It may show an invoice. It might show what you thought it showed, but maybe you're like, oh, well, this is wrong, or it was an error, or whatever. You think nothing of it. Well, what happens is once that payload's dropped, oftentimes your antivirus won't detect it because it's called a 0-day keylogger. Well, what is it doing? It's capturing every single keystroke without your knowledge and exfiltrating it right to the hackers. So this is what happened with Target, Michaels, Home Depot, Sony. They all got hacked with a keylogger. Super easy software. You can get into any company and just skirt right through all the security. Wow. And you can't detect it. You can get the latest firewall that they make. You can get the best antivirus that you think that you can find from any make or model vendor. It's not going to stop a 0-day keylogger. So the big tip that I recommend to folks is use a password manager with a passphrase that's greater than 22 characters, complex. I know that's super hard for a human, but then pair it with something like this. You ever seen one of those?
No, what is that?
That's a hardware token. This one in particular is called a YubiKey. So what that does is you use a password manager. So we're all human, right? I've got bazillion passwords to all different things, right? And every day I log into something, it's like, oh, you need to change your password. I don't even know what the heck my passwords are because I rely on a password manager. But I don't just rely on the password manager. I also use and link it to what's called a hardware token. So I use the two connected together. So if I got a keylogger on my system somehow, they can capture my long 22 character password, but they won't get in because they need my hardware key too. They need both forms. So it's kind of like multi-factor authentication, which I highly recommend enabling for any type of websites that you know, right. Box, Dropbox, Facebook, whatever you use, you should enable two-factor. But this takes it a step further because now you're encrypting and using all your passwords, but you're using a hardware token as well.
What password manager is are most effective, you think?
There's several on the market. RoboForm is a good one, but I'm not sure if RoboForm has updated their system to support hardware tokens. I know LastPass does. You can get a cheap LastPass license. So it's less than $200 a year.
Right.
The token itself, you can go on Amazon. It's like $50 for the token. But this like greatly enhances your cybersecurity if you go to all your websites and you make sure you have 22 plus character complex passwords. You change them all and you protect it with that hardware key and the big passphrase. That's significantly improving your cybersecurity. Just doing those two little things. It's not the silver bullet. I'm not saying you don't have to do policies, procedures, and all the other stuff.
Right.
That's an example of like 2 security control layers out of the 110 in NIST. But
Right.
my point is that anything that we can do, all of us, whether it doesn't matter what business we're in, anything we can do, little steps forward will help. And I believe in a layered approach. So the more little layers that we could do, the better.
No, I'm with you. I think I had listened to a webinar a couple weeks ago, and I think we've mentioned most of the tips that they had forwarded on in that webinar. Update your devices, right? They're always making adjustments and security patches to address any known threats. Beef up your password practices, right? So 22 key characters, use sentences, never the same, all those things. For me, I mean, I'm not a cyber professional, so I was taking that to heart and saying, okay, here's some, Joe Schmo tips that I can use. And then I thought the 2-factor authentication was really good. And we know that, like you said, it's not perfect, right? But it's a weapon to use in the battle, right? So
yeah, but so a lot of business email compromise, where you get an email to a C-level or somebody important in the organization that has buying authority, sometimes they'll get tricked by a hacker into maybe they use Microsoft Office 365, for example, and maybe the phishing email that comes in looks like the login to Microsoft Office 365 on purpose by the bad actors. And it says, hey, log in with your Microsoft credentials, right? And they do that to capture your credentials, to hack you, to try to get into your email and spy on your communications, to maybe do wire fraud or something like that. But had you had a 2-factor authentication enabled in your Microsoft Office 365 or your Google ecosystem, it would have stopped that dead in the tracks. You would have given them their password if you fell for that, which is bad, obviously, and you should train so that you don't fall for that. But in the event that you did, or one of your employees did, had you had 2-factor authentication enabled, that one security control layer, had you had that in place for everyone in the organization, that would have stopped them in their tracks. It's not perfect. There are ways to circumvent and get around that if you're subject to a very sophisticated hacker that can, social engineer their way around that. My point is, though, that's it. You've now elevated your cybersecurity level, right, to a point where, again, most hackers are smart and lazy. If they find that you've got that, they're going to move on to an easier target.
Oh, the analogy, you're right. The analogy is, what was that called? Do you remember the bar that used to see, I would go across the steering wheel?
Yeah, the club.
Big and red.
The
club. And simply, I mean, how many potential car thefts did the club prevent simply by being on the steering wheel?
That's right. It's just like the alarm system. You get a sticker or sign from an alarm company, you stick it out in your yard. The sign alone is statistically proven to deter criminal activity. Smarter criminal, I call those layers. So the more, the sticker's a layer, the sign's another layer. Well, maybe you get a camera, that's another layer. Maybe you have a dog, that's another layer. The more stuff you do, and you don't just protect your front door. I mean, you protect all your entry points and your windows and everything else. Right. If you want a all-inclusive kind of cybersecurity, or in this case, physical security protection level. But my point is, by blending all these layers together, you're making yourself as closer to being unhackable as you can, right? So the closer we can get to make ourselves less of a mark, the better. And, some of this stuff does not have to be expensive either. Multi-factor is free for most software. the little hardware token that I showed you, that's cheap, $50.
Right.
The latest statistics on what a cost of a breach is, it's over $150,000, $200,000 now. It'll bury a small business, But I still talk nowadays to business owners, and they're like, I'm not going to do all this stuff. It's too expensive, So they've been in business 20 plus years, and I've never had this happen before. I've never had any problems. I've been in business 20, 30 years. Times are different now.
They are, and they know that if you go after the large department stores, they are better protected than than the small mom and pop pawn shop down the street, right? Which has plenty of information, or any small employer. So it's no less important for a small employer to have these procedures in place and then an insurance policy. I mean, I hope folks are doing one or the other, either, and truth be told, your insurance application is essentially a best practices checklist. Are you doing these, yes or no? And sometimes you do see some very basic questions answered no, such as, do you have a firewall? Is private health information encrypted? And the answer is no. And, many times if I see those out in application, I'll double check with my clients. Are you sure? Because this probably won't be a question. We want to be honest here. We don't want to, we want to hear a no from the insurance company now rather than after a claim. So let's be honest, but are you sure? Like, yeah, we're sure. I'm like, okay, well, I'll send it in anyway. And a lot of times they won't offer.
And this is where I think the CMMC is a good thing. So the CMMC is really the newest, latest and greatest. It's the cybersecurity ISO for North America, for the United States of America. Okay.
Right.
So it's the most recent release of 5 different levels of how do we secure our, in this case, the supply chain of the Department of Defense. However, these best practices can be used for any company. Right. And there's tools out there that are freely available that can significantly enhance your cybersecurity maturity level. And I think the best part about all of it is you can't fake it anymore. Right. You have to get a third party to look over the IT guy or the company's systems. They have to go there. They can't self-attest. So they have to prove with 2 pieces of supporting evidence each of these things are really being done. And you can't do this stuff overnight and fake it. So it's like, right. I think it's going to be overall painful for a lot of folks, sadly, because it's going to be a wake-up call. But I think that maybe one day it'll be a third-party requirement to get cyber insurance. I think that could happen because it's going to be better protecting the cybersecurity insurance providers like you guys from payouts. You're going to have more secure folks that you're insuring.
Yeah. And what I think what we've seen too is that in many areas, the Department of Defense has been sort of a trailblazer. They talk about there's so many things, so much technology that was first in a weapon, and then all of a sudden
right.
it's in our cell phones because
GPS, for example,
worked and it became cheaper. Yeah, GPS, perfect example. Now it's it's in your watch, it's in your car, it's everywhere. So if the DoD is sort of leading the charge on the CMC requirements, then it could be that it gets adopted more universally. And I
really think that's true.
I would, trust me, I would love it if no one needs cyber insurance, because it's one of those things that's not perfect. And I'll say that about any line of insurance. And should you have a breach, it's very stressful.
Absolutely.
You're down. You mentioned the hospitals. So it was 6 California and Oregon hospitals that were breached and attacked on the same day. And you and I talked about it, but many of these hospital administrators were saying, we're on paper right now. That's
go back to the Stone Age.
Yeah. That is how far we've fallen. Until we get back up, we are on paper. And oh my gosh, I can't imagine potential lawsuits that could, I guess, arise from this event if somebody's health was impacted because they
absolutely
the level of care and the manner.
And that's happened before in past attacks with ransomware on medical. People have died, because they couldn't get the the health support that they needed because the systems weren't available. There was an incident, I think it was in Germany, that there was a lot of people died. It was really sad. And
yeah, I sent that email to a lot of my clients and prospective clients, just saying, hey, just be on the lookout. Just be very aware right
yeah,
now. Make sure all your employees, team members, head information officer, make sure they know about all this.
mm-hmm.
And they probably knew it before me, but just in case they were wondering if it had any insurance, implications, it does. Because, also on that insurance application, it will ask you, have you had any recent attacks?
Right.
Have you been victim of any recent attacks? Because, they know what you know, which is those bad guys may come back.
But the scary part is a lot of the folks may not have the technology to know if something, I mean, there could be somebody lurking on the network. And I'm not saying that to scare people. I'm saying it out of truth from
Right.
forensics that we've done. We found bad actors in networks 3 to 6 months of spying on communications before they pounced.
Right.
So the folks that we were helping, they had no clue. They had no technology to detect, or the hackers were covering up their logs and their trails and things like that. And
Right.
free software doesn't have the security and compliance, security control layers to be able to track back. That's another good point too. Since it's typically a long period of time before an individual or a company learns that they've been breached, oftentimes their backup window doesn't go far enough. Their log data doesn't go far enough back. Like in healthcare for HIPAA compliance, you're supposed to be saving all the logs, the firewalls, you're supposed to have all that supporting evidence in the event that you have a breach. Most of the folks that are in healthcare, they don't have that stuff. And that's an example of a control layer. So that's what I'm saying. I think the CMMC is overall going to be a good thing because you have to show evidence of that. You have to show your logs and show a trail of all that stuff. And, just last week when the CISO of the DoD, Katie Arrington, was talking about what's called the DFARS interim rule, she was saying how this affects over 300,000 federal contractors that do business with the DoD. And a lot of people were asking questions, and universities were like, well, do we have to do it too, universities? And she says, yes, absolutely. There's only 2 areas that don't have to do it. And it's commercial off the shelf, COTS. And there was another one where it was something less than $10,000, like a really small, it's called micro purchases, which he called it. So $10,000 or less micro purchases type company. Those are the only 2 that don't have to do this. And even if you don't fall into that bucket, you should still use the free tools anyway and get the help now. Take the action now to do it, because it's going to save you so much money and aggravation in the future from avoiding something like a breach. I mean, it could very well save your company.
Yeah. And, a lot of insurance companies are getting smarter about offering resources to their policyholders to make sure that they are adopting best practices. Sometimes even with the quote, they can do a cursory scan of the dark web and say, hey, the following email addresses were found on the dark web. And a lot for me, a lot of times I'll just pass this along to my client with the quote. Honestly, I mean, they already have the cyber, so I'm not trying to resell. I'm just saying you are exposed. Please, I'm glad you have the insurance. However, please make sure that you're staying up to date on all the new regulatory requirements and the latest and greatest defense tools. Make sure you're doing it. And
absolutely. Like,
hopefully they do.
I mean, I like to use the analogy of your health, right? If you go to the doctor, you get a checkup. You're supposed to do that every year, every few years or whatever. The earlier you get detection of something bad, the more likely you are of survival to mitigate the risk. So if you find something early enough, you can take smaller action steps that are oftentimes less expensive to remediate the issue and longer term help you, right? It's the same thing, So I think it's a big deal, and I think that it's going to be in the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years, it's going to be huge. I think for a lot of different companies, and really getting them to take action.
Yeah, and we'll see, how long it takes for the true fallout of everyone moving to virtual.
Yeah.
See what that's going to cost the economy, what it's going to cost employers if they're not helping train their virtual employees to really follow the protocols. Another insurance piece that might be good for your audience to know is that if you have employees who, now that they don't have to be at their cubicle, if they've decided to move away from the office and they're deciding that they like to be a virtual employee and the employer is okay with that, and they decide to move out of state, the employer should check with the workers' compensation insurance company. So workers' comp is, on the job injuries.
Okay.
But they need to make sure that the workers' comp policy that they have in place currently would be able to cover an injury to an employee that's working out of state.
Oh, that's a good point.
If they will, then great. Just add that person's working address, whether it's their home address or I guess wherever they might be working there, to the policy. However, if the insurance carrier can't cover an employee living out of state, the employer will have to purchase a second or third or fourth or fifth insurance policy to cover those workplace injuries in that extra state. So, we'll have clients that will have a California policy. They may have a Colorado policy. And then there are some states where you can only purchase it from their quasi-state government, kind of like buying it from the DMV.
Right.
You have to go there to buy it. So those are just good questions to ask. It's come up several times where, an employer has a worthwhile, loyal employee that wants to move out of state. Those are good considerations to watch out for.
Those are great tips. Thank you.
Yeah.
What about something that came to mind while you were saying that? What if you had an organization and you had a bad actor inside your organization, like an employee that maybe was upset that didn't get the salary increase that he or she wanted, and did something negative to the company, whether it's data exfiltration to a foreign entity, or does a typical cyber insurance policy cover something like that, or is that a separate thing to consider?
So if the bad actor who's an employee were to steal money, that would most likely be triggered on a separate policy, which would be the crime policy. So the number one coverage there would be several, but it's called employee dishonesty or employee theft. And typically a definition of employee is going to be intern, volunteer, employee, many times former employee. If there's a board, a volunteer board, even if they're not volunteer, so it would be those directors and officers as well. And if they do anything from steal gas cards to really, I'll give you an example. Probably about 8 years ago, we had a client who they had terminated 2 individuals. Well, the office manager, for whatever reason, she kept those 2 employees on the books, but changed where their payroll went to her bank account. So over several months, I think this was over about 10 months, she stole, tens of thousands of dollars from the company. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's important to have payroll audits, to make sure something like that doesn't occur, and
sure.
Make sure that the payroll records match the census. But so if an employee is going to steal money, whether it's from computer means or otherwise, the crime policy is going to pick it up. And I would certainly, recommend making sure that those limits are reviewed every year. I can't tell you what the limit should be. I wish I always knew the answer to that question. But it's something that should be reviewed with your insurance broker on an annual basis and make sure everybody's comfortable.
Okay. All right. That's excellent information. What about in the situation if there's bribery? I'm assuming that would cover, like, if somebody was sending sensitive data to Russia or a sanctioned area, and then they were going to get paid in Bitcoin or something, but a crime hasn't technically been committed yet. Maybe an investigation has to happen, and I'm sure attorneys and counsel will have to get involved in that. But I'm assuming that would fall under.
I would say that is definitely something that should be reported.
Yeah.
Now, I would say, I wish all insurance companies were, or at least their adjusters were looking for coverage in the event that a claim comes in. Some are better than others. But hopefully you can work with your broker who will look at the various coverage conditions and look for coverage. So again, it's always going to depend on the hypothetical details of the claim. Who did what? Was it data? Was it money? Who are they working with? But always put my recommendation is always put the insurance company on notice as soon as you find out, because at the bottom of every policy, one of the conditions is, hey, as soon as you are aware or reasonably should be aware that something has happened, you need to let us know. Even if it doesn't end up either being covered or you wish to pursue it as a claim, let the carrier know, because you don't want to be 6, 7, 8 months down the road and you report the claim and they say, well, when did this happen?
Right.
And they're starting from square one. And that really goes for any insurance policy, whether it's, errors and omissions policy, liability, auto, a water leak in the kitchen. Always let your insurance carrier know right away.
That's a good tip. And that also kind of segues into, almost all 50 states have breach notification laws. So you have to notify, there's certain laws around who to notify and when, and how much time you have when you figure out what happened and all that fun stuff. But that brings me to the segue of, it's important if you do suffer a breach, actually it's better to proactively hire a data privacy attorney to protect you and your company from the very beginning, especially when you're supposed to be doing the annual security risk assessments and the annual penetration tests. You want to make sure that you hire a data privacy attorney that then hires the cybersecurity and compliance firm under their umbrella to get the attorney-client privilege, because that's very important to get those protections. Otherwise, if you hire the cybersecurity and compliance firm directly and you avoid the attorney-client privilege, all of the findings can be subpoenaed, and that could really be negatively impacting your company severely. So I think that's a really good tip that I like to provide to folks. So if you had to, Sam, give folks, maybe 1 or 2 tips, should they be checking their cyber every year, or like, what are some tips that you can give a couple of folks?
So I would say definitely a best practices step you can take is to review your cyber application every year very closely. There could be, and a lot of times it's just really easy for anybody to look at that and see 20 different questions answered yes or no and to assume nothing has changed. But make sure either you fill it out yourself or give it to your IT professional, whether it's in-house or contracted, and have them complete it every year so that it's accurate. Because you'd hate to see a claim go declined or denied because the application wasn't accurate. And then I would really recommend just a really robust work from home policy right now that's going to include training on all the cybersecurity measures. Probably good for everybody to do annually, but I think now that we've got a remote virtual workforce,
absolutely
even more important. So to try to make it simple, I would say those are the 2 things. Just make sure that your insurance application is up to date and accurate, and then make sure you double down on training your workforce.
Awesome. Great tips. And we do have training like that available to folks that reach out to our website. You can sign up for various levels. We have different levels of training for organizations of all sizes.
Good. I hope your clients are using it, because it's going to be important.
They ask about it, and sometimes they'll sign up for it. We recommend it highly, of course. And then we find that some people don't even realize that they have it, and then we have to remind them to take the test. So
Right.
You got to bang them over the head sometimes. But
you can lead a horse to water.
That's right.
But if they listen to this podcast, they'll do it.
That's right. I hope so. Anyway, fingers crossed.
Right.
Well, thank you, Sam. What's the best way for folks to reach you? And you mentioned that annual review. Is that something that you do for folks, or is that something that like as a service, or how does that work?
Yeah. So, well, I can be reached at area code 619-937-0175. Again, 619-937-0175. You can also email me at sbrown, spelled just like the color, at ranchomesa.com. That's ranchomesa.com. But yeah, what we will do is, make sure that we go through the applications with our clients. If they have questions on whether or not they're answering it honestly or I guess in an educated fashion, make sure they know what they're answering. And then we'll go out to the market and find the coverage that's going to respond to the new threats that are evolving all the time. And then most importantly, sit down and make sure the client knows what they're buying. And if they're making a decision not to buy something, making sure they understand what they can do to make sure that they don't regret that decision.
Awesome advice. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all your help and your insights. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to yet another episode of Cybersecurity and Compliance with Craig Petronella. Listen to all of our podcasts on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Visit us online at petronellatech.com to book a meeting with Craig about your business.
Thanks for listening to the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. For other episodes and more information, visit petronellatech.com. Also visit our other websites, compliancearmor.com and blockchainsecurity.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and stay secure.